Most of us have the same instinct when we open the New Testament to Matthew chapter 1. We see a massive wall of ancient, hard-to-pronounce names, treat it like an outdated phone book, and skip right past it to get to the story. Treating these verses as filler is a mistake. This list operates as an encrypted legal brief to prove an airtight claim to a throne. For a first-century Jewish audience, the stakes here are absolute. Anyone stepping forward to claim the title of Messiah has to clear a massive historical hurdle. They must prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that they descend from a highly specific, prophesied family line. That is exactly what the author was doing here. Matthew systematically constructs a foolproof legal argument to establish Jesus' exact credentials as a direct descendant of Abraham and King David. Reading these 17 verses reveals a dense archive of cultural and historical data, where each entry functions as specific evidence for the legal claim being presented. The architecture of this opening chapter establishes the structural framework for the rest of Matthew's account. The data structure of this genealogy is highly intentional. Matthew compresses roughly 2,000 years of Jewish history into 3 distinct epochs: Abraham to King David, David to the Babylonian exile, and the exile to Jesus. He perfectly arranges each historical block to contain exactly 14 generations. To understand why he chose that specific number, we have to look at the ancient Jewish practice of gematria, a system where letters of the alphabet directly correlate to numerical values. In Hebrew, vowels aren't with Naut, so the name David is spelled with 3 consonants: Dalet, Vav, and Dalet. In the gematria system, Dalet is 4, Vav is 6, and the second Dalet is 4 again. That sums to exactly 14. By forcing the genealogy into this rigid mathematical structure, Matthew intentionally stamps the title of Davidic king across the entire timeline of Israel. The historical reality contained within that middle block of time is crucial. It begins with David and his son Solomon, representing the absolute peak of the united Israelite monarchy. But that unity didn't last. Under Solomon's son Rehoboam, the kingdom fractured. This map details the resulting political boundaries, showing the territory divided into 2 weakened, vulnerable nations, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. This fracture ultimately paved the way for the devastating 70-year Babylonian exile. The Jewish people were violently removed from their homeland and thrust into a massive foreign empire, resulting in profound physical and spiritual displacement. Matthew engineers the mathematics of his timeline to directly answer this historical trauma. It functions as a precise legal argument that the long exile is finally over and the rightful king has arrived to reclaim the throne. First-century royal genealogies followed strict cultural rules. They were designed to emphasize absolute moral and ethnic purity, and they almost universally excluded women. Matthew deliberately shatters these conventions. He injects 4 glaring disruptions into his meticulous list: Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, and Bathsheba. Historically, these women were outsiders and Gentiles, their stories deeply entangled with moral scandal and complex, compromising situations. Their complicated backgrounds stand in stark contrast to the pristine, spotless pedigree one would expect from a divine Messiah coming to save his people. To a rigid religious scholar reading this text 2,000 years ago, elevating these names would be deeply offensive and highly irregular. But Matthew includes them with highly specific intent. He is psychologically preparing his audience for an even greater disruption at the very end of the family tree: Mary. By disrupting the expected pattern of purity, Matthew signals that the requirements for this lineage are not found in moral perfection or ethnic exclusivity. The timeline then narrows from millennia of history down to a single moment in the obscure small town of Nazareth. Here, Mary is betrothed to a man named Joseph. First-century Jewish betrothal was entirely different from our modern concept of an engagement. It carried severe legal weight. It was a fully binding covenant, and the only way to break a betrothal was through a formal, documented process of divorce. Into this rigid legal structure drops a narrative-breaking scandal. Mary is discovered to be pregnant before the marriage is finalized. The social and legal penalties for suspected infidelity during this period were extreme. Under the law, a woman in Mary's position could face total public ruin or even a legal death sentence. The text describes Joseph as a just man, placing him at the center of an intense moral crisis. He is caught in an impossible legal trap between his adherence to the law and his compassion for Mary. He resolves to quietly terminate the betrothal through a private divorce, attempting to spare Mary's life and avoid a public spectacle. Before he can execute this plan, an angel intervenes in a dream, commanding Joseph to halt the divorce proceedings and take Mary as his wife. The angel reveals the true nature of her pregnancy, stating clearly that the child was conceived miraculously by the Holy Spirit. The angelic message identifies the pregnancy not as a breach of contract, but as a specific supernatural operation. The angel's message to Joseph directly invokes a specific prophecy written by the prophet Isaiah hundreds of years earlier, stating that a virgin would conceive and bear a son. The prophecy declares his name will be Emmanuel, which translates literally to God with us. The specific meaning of the name Jesus, he will save his people from their sins, addresses the long history of compromise and failure documented throughout the preceding family tree. Jesus did not arrive in a vacuum. God spent millennia actively preparing the Jewish nation, establishing the legal requirements and the exact lineage necessary for his arrival. The record in Matthew proves that God uses broken people, controversial histories, and unexpected grace to execute his perfect plan to save humanity. Put yourself in Joseph's shoes for a minute. How would you have reacted to this kind of legal and cultural nightmare? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming historical deep dive into the events of Matthew chapter 2.